Hey, look where we are. We're back in the studio. If you can see us, if you're watching on YouTube at least, you can see a 2 metre distance, strict 2 metre distance between me and Lizzie. We just happened to be in the office today doing something else, so we thought, well, why not do it the old-fashioned way of actually being in the studio? So welcome to the Royal Rota.
It's exciting, isn't it? Feels like life might slowly be creeping back to some kind of normality.
Everything's kind of exciting in the sense that the Royals have been out and about this week, and we've actually been on an official royal engagement, not on Zoom, not virtually, but actually in person. So
yeah, we've actually seen royals face to face. They have seen people face to face. It's been lovely getting back to...
Yeah, so we're rather hoping it's a slow return to normal, and we'll talk about how they did it, because that's even in itself quite interesting, how the Royals have managed to remain socially distant and go through the whole thing. So we're here. Welcome to the Royal Rota, available on YouTube if you're watching this, but also you can listen and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform, be that Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you normally get your podcasts from. So welcome along for the ride. We're here for next half hour. We're also going to have a special guest from the Racing Post, because Ascot's been running this week. No royal guests, no crowds, no one other than the horses and the jockeys on them. But nevertheless, it's a lot to talk about there. So you do your Robinson's Royal Rundown, and then we'll start on how we've done these socially distant royal engagements this week.
So we kicked the week off with a visit to Windsor, where the Queen was marking her official birthday with what was dubbed a mini Trooping the Colour, which happened in the quadrangle at Windsor Castle. We had a military ceremony that she observed, and we got to see her in person in her first official public engagement. And then from there, the other senior royals have been back this week with their first official face-to-face engagements. That started with the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall visiting a hospital in Gloucestershire. And then Prince William that afternoon was visiting ambulance responders in Norfolk. Charles and Camilla had another engagement later this week, a ceremony with the French president. And today, so Friday, we have been able to share Kate and William's visits in Norfolk supporting small businesses.
And what I know about Norfolk is it's a long way to get to for a very short engagement, and we can talk about that. So Royals back in action effectively. They've been saying to us for a while how they've been looking at how they can do this. Now, Charles and Camilla were out together. William and Kate did it separately. Conversations were had. If you're going to go inside somewhere, how do you stay 2 metres away from everybody? Charles and Camilla got around that by doing everything outside. So we went to Gloucester, to Gloucestershire Royal Hospital, where they went there to thank NHS staff. So that effectively the very first royal visit was to thank NHS staff. And we noticed, the first thing we noticed, wasn't it, was the yellow spots of paint that were in the grass, so everyone was 2 metres apart.
Yeah, I thought it was fitting that the first engagement was to thank the NHS, those that have been on the front line throughout the pandemic, working so hard, to thank them. I thought that was a very fitting first engagement. But as you say, they met 16 frontline workers from the hospital, and there were these yellow blobs on the grass to mark out the 2 metre points. There were stickers on the path to show everyone that was moving around where they should be standing.
So the royal feet, the two royal feet, had to be kept on the pavement or sidewalk, if you prefer, if you're watching this on the other side of the Atlantic. And on the grass, 2 metres away, were the first line of people they were going to meet, and behind them were the second line. And they sort of flipped over once they'd done their conversations, all very regimented, but kind of the way it had to be.
Yeah, Prince Charles joked, didn't he, that it was like some sort of military move. Yes. that they did. But I actually thought, yes, it was strange, yes, it was different, but actually I thought it worked really well, which is positive, because it means that, it having worked for them, for the people they met, for us, it means that potentially we can see more of this going forward.
Yeah, and I think this week it has shown us that you can do things outside. You just have to do them a little bit differently, and also, to be fair, you have to have a smaller group of reporters and media there, because as we know, particularly with the photographers, they're not known for staying 2 metres apart from each other, let alone from the royals, because they all sort of bunch into the corner of the pen where you get the best shots, which is obviously what they're trying to get.
But even the crowd that are gathered at the sort of far end of where we were, even they were socially distanced.
Yes,
So everyone
yeah,
was
we've got a
very
good picture
respectful
there,
of
haven't we?
the
Yes.
rules. And I think doing it in that contained corner of the hospital and sort of not releasing any details in advance so people couldn't gather, it all went quite smoothly.
Now, we were there, as you probably gathered, and it also meant that we were able to have a conversation with the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall just as they were about to leave. We asked them about the NHS, we asked them about the sort of the differences of doing these things in this way, and we had a tiny chat at the very end about what it was like for Camilla, who got to see her grandchildren again, if not hug them upon their return from Scotland. So have a listen to the chat that we had with Charles and Camilla. Do you think the country's appreciation of the NHS has changed, probably for good?
Oh, I think it has. I mean, you can tell by all the people coming out every week to clap, and they've done the most remarkable things. I mean, the way they've looked after people, the way they've sort of kept control of the whole thing. You know, it's a question of not panicking and getting on with it, and I think they are Britain at its best.
It's been a marvellous opportunity just to have a chance of seeing people who've, I know, been doing so much literally on the front line, and having to endure an awful lot of stress and strain, I think, in their wonderful way. How they do it, I don't know.
And have you been able to at least see your grandchildren, if not hug them yet?
First time last weekend.
That was nice.
Anyway,
Not hug them, but see them. A great treat.
it was very
Thank you
good
so
you've
much
been
for
allowed out as well, if I may say so.
Same for us as well. Good to be allowed. So the NHS are the best of Britain. I thought that's a really nice line from Camilla, wasn't it? I mean, I think most people would agree with her there. She really delivered that in the way in which, you know, they've not panicked and they've gone through the care. I mean, they'd just been hearing from those staff that I think something like 12 members of staff at the hospital in Gloucester had got coronavirus and had to be treated, and the last one only came out of treatment a couple of days ago, and they all clapped them out as well. You know, they were hearing that firsthand, which I think they really appreciated.
And of course, I think it means even more to them because they've got first-hand experience of the Prince of Wales having had coronavirus, and he was talking about how even now, some months on, he's still lost his sense of taste and smell, didn't he? He was one of his conversations he was having. We picked up on that.
Yeah, have a little listen to Jeff, actually. So Jeff was one of the healthcare assistants who actually works in respiratory medicine, if you can call it that. And he had a conversation with Prince Charles. If you just have a little listen to this bit, when I spoke to him, as Lizzie says, he looks like he's still suffering a little bit from the effects of coronavirus, be that his loss of sense or smell, and also perhaps his fatigue as well. Have a listen.
He also spoke about his loss of smell and taste, and sort of still felt that he's still got it now.
So not just Charles and Camilla out and about this week. I was at a garden centre. I haven't been to one for a long time, but it was. I wasn't there to do my own shopping, of course. I was there because
No basil plants.
No basil plants.
Oh.
No, I only get them very cheaply from the supermarket when they have been reduced. But actually, funny enough, they were having trouble getting herbs because herbs have been a really popular item, as Kate was being told. Kate, I mean, actually, I was listening to Kate, and she turned up. She drove herself there because obviously she was coming from Anna Hall nearby. Obviously, we didn't film any of that because actually this is her private car, the one that she uses to get around Norfolk with the children. But she was talking about how they've been trying to do gardening at home. They couldn't get any tomato plants for ages, which I think was a problem for a lot of people. So couldn't grow any tomatoes. And it was just, she chose some herbs and she bought some flowers afterwards, and it's obviously a thing that she enjoys. We know that Kate enjoys gardening.
Yeah, she seemed very comfortable and at ease being at the garden centre. We know she's quite hands-on, either in the garden or in the kitchen. We've heard her talk before how she enjoys doing both, and she seemed very at ease chatting away to them about their experiences during the pandemic and how they're beginning to open as the lockdown eases. And both Kate and William were at businesses that have been closed for an awfully long time. They're small independent businesses. The garden centre was shut for about 7 weeks. The bakery William visited had been shut for 11 weeks, which is a long time.
The boss of the owner of the Fakenham Garden Centre was telling me that he's lost about £1 million, a quarter of the year's turnover, and they don't think they're going to get that back. So they'll be running on a loss this year. I suppose that as much as we're listening out for hearing some sort of personal tidbits from William and Kate about things, and we're talking a sec about what William said in the bakery. I mean, the whole point of this was to say to people, look, it's safe to go back out into your local communities, providing you keep the 2 metre distance. And businesses like these ones close to our home, but people will have businesses close to their homes, they need custom. They need people to come back and spend money.
And actually, Kate was saying, wasn't she, that when people are out and about, that social interaction, she feels like it's gone. When she's been shopping, she's noticed that everyone's very much looking down at what they're doing rather than looking up and kind of interacting. And she's sort of hoping that even if people keep the 2 metres apart, that they can still socially engage with each other.
Has some of your staff been worried about coming back into the work environment and interacting?
I think the first day, wasn't it? First day, but then after that.
Once they saw how we were, working things with distance. Because I was noticing, so when I've been out and about food shopping, that everyone sort of keeps their heads down. There's nothing, maybe that's just in the food shopping environment. But and so although there's the spacing and everyone's going to keep the distance, actually trying to encourage that, the social interaction which everyone's really missed. I think it's important. And environments like this are great.
That was one of the conversations we heard Kate talk about when she was speaking to Malcolm and Jenny Turner, who are the owners of the garden centre. I mean, they've had a difficult time. I mean, this isn't all just about, gardening, and isn't it lovely that people have been discovering gardening for the first time in a long time? But, they've had to make, half a dozen staff redundant. They have furloughed a lot of their staff under the government scheme. So, hearing firsthand really what it's like running a small business, when your customers literally dried up. And I think those were the serious points. And William was hearing a similar thing from a bakery in King's Lynn, Smith's Bakery, who baked him a cake, we should point out as well.
Baked him a cake for his birthday, which is on Sunday.
Yeah.
And he also, he joked that he also has been doing some baking in the kitchen. We shouldn't make it just that Kate's been in the kitchen, he has too. And he says that the children have been making a spectacular mess.
An explosion, I think, was how William referred to it. So have a listen to Prince William talking about the explosion that happens in the kitchen when George, Charlotte and Louis do some baking.
I asked them the other day that they'd been doing some baking.
Well, I've done a little bit of baking. The children have been attacking the kitchen and it's just an explosion of flour and chocolate everywhere.
So there's some royal cash was handed over at some point because William left with a little parcel of some pastries that he'd bought, and it looked like a cake that they'd made for him because obviously it's his birthday on the 21st of June.
Yeah, he said he wasn't allowed to go home without, he'd be in trouble if he turned up at home without anything for the family. So he bought some pastries, so maybe the mess will be calmer today.
Yes, they won't be doing any baking, and also he celebrates his birthday on Sunday.
On Sunday.
So happy birthday to Prince William, and I hope you enjoy the cake. If you've got anything left over, of course, well, they'll always be welcome in our studio.
And the Queen actually, she released a message to tie in with
it kind
this.
of tied the whole thing together, didn't it? Yeah.
Yes, she's patron of the
British Chambers of Commerce.
Thank you. And she was a message of support to businesses as they begin to reopen.
Yes, exactly. So to tie it all together, a message from the Queen, William and Kate out and about visiting, and clearly that was the message. As we understand it, the royals are going to be sort of going out more regularly. We know of some things that might be happening next week that we will let you know in due course. If you need royal news and you need it more regularly than just getting it weekly from this podcast, and of course on Twitter I'm at Chrisship ITV, you are
at Lizzie ITV.
And also we have our Instagram page dedicated only to royal news and royal pictures, which is on Instagram at ITV News Royals. Now, one of the big pictures of the week, of course, was the Queen celebrating her official birthday. We spoke about it last week, of course, and everything that was going to happen. But so we were in Windsor. We've done all right this week, haven't we? Windsor, Norfolk. You were at Clarence House for Emmanuel Macron, the French president. So
Gloucestershire.
Yeah, exactly. Finally, we feel like we've left the house.
We did say at the end of last week we thought things were stepping up a gear, and it definitely has.
The predictions on this podcast are always correct. And the Queen, I mean, what did we make of it? I mean, it was a week ago now, maybe, but it was, a smaller event. There was plenty of marching on the quadrangle in front of her, and a lot of smiling from the Queen, particularly at the end, wasn't there?
Yeah, she looked very happy to be out. Well, aren't we all?
Yes, all happy to be out and about.
And that was, so she was watching the Welsh Guards in the quadrangle, and they, if Trooping the Colour had gone ahead this year, they would have had their colours trooped in the big ceremony that we always see.
Yes, it was the
through
Welsh
London.
Guards. But the chap who's in charge, the regimental, was he the garrison sergeant major who's in charge, was telling us how they've basically just had to do a lot of this on a whiteboard and replan the entire thing, what works, what doesn't work in a smaller space with fewer people. It's quite interesting in the interview that we did with him about how really they had to start this from scratch because they've never really done this before in the Queen's 68-year reign.
It's been quite tricky to come up with plans to change what we would annually do on the Queen's official birthday. Normally we'd do the Trooping of the Colour, which you'd see on Horse Guards Parade and would involve almost 2,000 soldiers and horses. Clearly we can't do that under the current restrictions, so it's been quite a challenge thinking about social distancing and what we can achieve. Lots of going to the whiteboard and then re-scribbing because it just doesn't meet. And of course we're doing this at a time where the country is in essence in mourning because lots of people have lost their lives during the pandemic, lots of insecurity in terms of people's futures. So it's an opportunity really for the Household Division to try and grasp and do something so the nation can celebrate Her Majesty's official birthday.
Trooping the Colours only been cancelled once before in the Queen's 68-year reign, and that was cancelled in the year
1955.
1955.
Because of a strike.
General strike, yes, there was a general strike, and presumably that meant they couldn't get either the police or the army or whatever it is that.
Sometimes feel
I
like
wasn't alive, and I might look like I was born in 1955, but I wasn't alive then. So.
Sometimes feel like I'm on mastermind on this podcast. I don't know.
You cannot come into this podcast without being armed with facts. It was the 80th anniversary of what this week?
It was the 80th anniversary of General de Gaulle's Appel.
Appel from London during the Second World War. We'll come on to that later if you're doing tests. What race was being run this week?
Lots of races at Royal Ascot.
Lots of races at Royal Ascot, OK. And it wasn't very royal either, was it? Which is a perfect time to talk about Royal Ascot, I think. Lee Mottershead was there. Hello, Lee. You're from the Racing Post. You got to go to Ascot and the Queen didn't. That must have been quite a privilege.
It was a huge privilege, yeah. It was a very, very strange Royal Ascot. The first truly big global sporting event that's taken place since the coronavirus lockdown started to ease. But because it's still very much having to be staged with very strict protocols, they've only been allowing those people whom they deem largely essential for staging a race meeting. That means that the people who own the horses, including the Queen at this stage, aren't allowed access to the track, which meant in turn that for the first time since 1946, the Queen wasn't present at the royal meeting.
Wow, it's quite something, wasn't it? Now, you were there. You've got one slot a day, so you've been there for a couple of days, and we're also there on the day that the Queen had her winner. The horse was called
Tactical,
and the jockey was called
James Doyle.
Yes, was she right, Lee?
She's not wrong. Yeah, she's not. What about the trainer?
The trainer is Andrew Harding, and I know all this because I have a very vested interest.
Do you think Lizzie's been reading the Racing Post as avidly as Her Majesty the Queen this week?
Well, do you know, but it was very, very sweet of her racing advisor, John Warren, who looks after her racing interests. Although, to be honest, the Queen could do it all herself, really. She's so knowledgeable and keen. But he was making the point after the victory in a Zoom conference that Her Majesty will have been reading the Racing Post every day in the build-up to the royal meeting. She was spending sort of 30 minutes every morning looking at the form and the races as the countdown to Royal Ascot gathered place. So she will have been one of the most knowledgeable spectators of the racing taking place during the week, and obviously could have been cheering on Tactical that day. In fact, she had two runners that day, and although Tactical was her 24th Royal Ascot winner, he could have been her 25th because she had a very close second in one of the earlier races too.
She did, yeah. Second with first receiver early in the day. And he actually won at Kempton, didn't he, recently?
He'd won a race at Kempton in the build-up to Royal Ascot. He was ridden by Frankie Dettori, of course, the world's most famous jockey in a race called the Hampton Court Stakes. And he led until close home. And Frankie, when he came back into this empty winners' enclosure, he joked straight to the tower was his line. But actually, the Queen takes defeat very well. Anyone in horse racing has to, because you lose an awful lot more than you win. But first receiver was favourite, and so was Tactical. So I think it was a day when the Queen would have been watching and expecting to go close with her two runners. But when you've been in the game as long as she has, I think you know never to go there too confident. And as an example of how hard it is to win at Royal Ascot, yes, that was her 24th winner at the meeting, but her first was back in 1953. So it's 24 over an awfully long time. It's a hugely competitive sporting environment. And of course, the Queen, although she's the Queen, her potential spending power on horse racing is actually relatively limited compared to some of the big owner breeders. It's all funded entirely out of her own private purse. So she has to be careful what she does. She has to run it, although it's a passion, she has to be sensible in how she runs her operation. But as I say, she takes it very seriously. And this horse who won Tactical was a horse who she didn't only own, but she bred the horse as well. So she owned and owns the horse's mother. She will have decided what stallion to send the mother to. So she was absolutely pivotal for the victory. And I've no doubt as well that she'll have played a close part in deciding which race to run. And it was a good race to pick as well, because she won the Windsor Castle Stakes and she was watching from Windsor Castle. So yeah, and any punters might have picked up on that as well.
What a shame that the Queen wasn't actually there, because they're always great shots, aren't they, of Royal Ascot, whatever race the Queen has an interest in, but particularly when she's got a winner. Lee, do you think this is the week when the Queen pushes all the other papers to one side? We know that she likes to read her papers in the morning. Do you think this is the one week of the year in particular when she pushes away the Telegraph and the Express and the Sun, and she turns on ITV, because that's where the racing has been, and just gets out her Racing Post? That's at the top of the pile this week.
I think you're absolutely right. The Queen today does read the Racing Post. It's a rare privilege to know that what you're writing is read by the Queen, and it is the week in which everyone says that when the Queen's doing her diary for the year, it's blocked off. She will always attend Royal Ascot. So she's been going there since 1946, and to not miss a day from 1946 until this year, 2020, shows her a commitment to the cause. And it's a fabulous thing for horse racing and for the meeting to have that support of the Queen. And it's why it's felt partly such a strange year this year, because normally the first race on the Royal Ascot card is at 2:30. At 2 o'clock, the Royal Procession comes down the racecourse, and on Gold Cup Day on Thursday of this week, there have been 70,000, 75,000 people watching the Royal Procession come down the racecourse. And she really is a pivotal part of the race meeting. Even this year, when there haven't been any spectators, they've still produced a traditional race card on whose first page is a personal welcome to racegoers from the Queen. Obviously, haven't been many racegoers this year, but it's nice that tradition has still been part of the meeting, and even nicer that the Queen's colours are carried to victory.
And of course, the Queen sent a message, didn't they? So when we were in Gloucestershire on Tuesday with Charles and Camilla, we suddenly saw that Ascot Racecourse had posted the message that the Queen had sent them.
Yeah, this appeared on the usual race card for the first day, a message from the Queen acknowledging that things were going to be different this year, but thanking everyone for the huge effort in making sure that it could go ahead as normal, even though it's not as it normally is.
Not normal at all. I send my best wishes, the Queen said, to the thousands of racing professionals and enthusiasts who will join me in celebrating this year's Royal Ascot. In these challenging times, we once again are delighted to welcome the best horses and jockeys from across the world to pay tribute to those who've helped make this race meeting possible. They made it possible, Lee, but just before we finish up with you, what was your impressions of it there when you went without the royals, without the crowds, without the trainers? It must have been pretty surreal.
It's been incredibly surreal. It's been weird, really. You know, you're watching a global sporting event, some of the world's finest thoroughbreds, the finest jockeys in the world, playing out in a huge sporting amphitheatre, because Ascot Racecourse, since its redevelopment 15, 16 years ago, is a magnificent beast. And to watch those races when there may be 20 people on the grandstand steppings was very surreal. It was surreal seeing winners come back into the winner's circle with a handful of us applauding as loudly as we could and trying to create an echo around the place. But of course, the great thing is that Ascot has been broadcast live on ITV all week. And for people watching on television. Whilst it will look very strange when they pan to the grandstands and they're empty, the action that you see out on the racecourse is as it ever was before, and I'm sure she and everybody else are looking forward to getting back there in 2021. The Queen's racing fortunes have really grown again in the last few years. So she's been having big race winners for an awfully long time. The one race she's never won that she really would adore winning is the Derby at Epsom, and still just a chance at First Receiver, who ran second the last week, might go there. But as a mark of how well she's doing, last year she had 29 winners in Britain, and that was her biggest total for at least 30 years. So although she is a veteran owner breeder, she is enjoying no less success than ever before. She's actually on a bit of a roll.
Although I was quite surprised, Tactical was her first winner since 2016 at Royal Ascot, so it's been a bit of a...
Yeah, I mean, just think what it would have been like had the Queen been there this week, or had we all been there this week. So we missed going there, and thank you for joining us. And given that the Queen is paying so much attention to what you're writing every day, you better go and keep an eye on the races this afternoon so that you don't get anything wrong.
Very good advice. Thank you, Chris.
So we couldn't be at Royal Ascot. Well, no one could be at Royal Ascot. No one could be at any of the football or soccer matches in the UK this week. It's all very different still. But as we've been saying throughout this podcast, at least the Royals are kind of out and about again. There was, however, a video message. It felt like a step backwards, didn't it? But nevertheless, there was a video message from the Prince of Wales for his Prince's Trust. Remember, the Prince's Trust, which looks after disadvantaged young people, helps them into employment, was set up by the Prince of Wales in the year... We're doing testing here.
Oh, no, I'm not going.
Okay, 1976, which was when he left the Royal Navy. He used the pension that he got from the military to set up the Prince's Trust. It's now a massive organisation which has been helping tens and tens of thousands of people. But he's particularly worried about the impact that coronavirus is going to have on the younger generation, which is what the Prince's Trust is all about, and the effect it might have on things like youth unemployment and opportunities for the most disadvantaged.
Yeah, he described it as potentially devastating, didn't he? The effect of this pandemic on the youth and how, concerns over all sorts of things, but particularly around unemployment. Yeah,
and I think, it shows here the concern that the Prince has and has always had, I think, for the younger generation, which was why this was very much his first charity endeavour after he left the Royal Navy. So this is the message that he gave to the Prince's Trust this week.
Amidst this deeply worrying public health crisis, which confronts us all, I did just want to send my heartfelt wishes to young people, as well as their families and their communities, at this very difficult time. I know only too well that youth unemployment can cause a terrible downward spiral, impacting mental health and leading to challenges such as low self-esteem, poverty, homelessness, or worse. When I founded my trust 44 years ago, the problems facing young people through unemployment and a lack of support were serious. Now, I fear, those problems have gone from serious to potentially devastating. While there is much uncertainty about how the COVID-19 pandemic will progress, it is clear that the impact will be enormous and the recovery extremely challenging. Desperately high numbers of lives and livelihoods are being lost as this double disaster sweeps the globe. We rely on and greatly appreciate your wonderfully generous support and owe an enormous debt of gratitude to those who have made all the work so far possible. You have quite literally saved lives, and I value your generosity more than I can possibly say. Young people now need your support more than ever. Their future is on the line, but together we can prevent this crisis from defining the prospects of a generation.
So Prince Charles went to Gloucester with Camilla for the hospital. He's done this message for the Prince's Trust. He also was with Camilla again at Clarence House to meet the President of La République of France, Monsieur Emmanuel Macron. And you saw them all, didn't you?
I did. So
I was in Norfolk.
And I stayed in London to do this. So
I had the long drive, the short one.
Which you were very enthusiastic about.
Until I discovered how far away it was, yes.
Probably did escape the homeschooling for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
The French president was received at Clarence House officially, and then the three of them moved from Clarence House to Carlton Gardens, just off the Mall, where there was a ceremony, a wreath laying, a minute's silence.
Is there a statue of Charles de Gaulle
there?
Right.
They arrived. The first wreath was laid at the statue of the Queen Mother, and then they moved around and up some steps, and then they arrived at the statue of Charles de Gaulle, and more wreaths were laid there.
Yeah, and of course Charles de Gaulle made the appel 80 years ago after France was occupied by Nazi Germany, and this was his appel to the French people to join him in the fight against the Nazis and to join the resistance movement, which was a key moment in the Second World War, and one that Prince Charles spoke about, not just in English.
In very competent French, and not just, he normally at the top of his speeches sort of gives a nod to the language, but he really did deliver a lot of
one thing
French.
we know about Prince Charles's speeches is that they're not often very short. They
are very thorough, I think.
This was
how we would
of
say.
Prince Charles's usual duration.
But half of it, I think,
was in French,
which is incredible.
Aujourd'hui, Monsieur le Président, réitérons notre engagement à travailler ensemble pour défendre ce qui nous est le plus cher et pour atteindre nos objectifs communs. Renouvelons le lien qui nous unit en tant que voisins, alliés, partenaires et amis. Et tournons-nous vers l'avenir, non seulement avec espoir, mais avec la certitude que, comme tant de fois par le passé, nous marcherons ensemble.
I suppose the question is, this was a much more, official engagement. Emmanuel Macron also met our Prime Minister Boris Johnson as well. But how did the whole social distancing thing work? There was a lovely shot, actually. Let's show you this picture of Camilla doing a namaste as she met Monsieur Macron.
Yeah, the namastes are back. We haven't seen them since sort of lockdown started. And there are, everywhere you go, there are stickers on the ground to show the principals, but also the press and aides where everyone can stand. But this engagement, we had to move between different locations. So I wasn't quite sure how that was going to work in terms of keeping
Did you all move like with 2 meters
but yeah,
apart?
everyone did very much respect the 2 metre distancing. But it is weird seeing these sort of white blobs on the ground everywhere to mark out where you can stand.
Which it doesn't matter whether you're royal, it doesn't matter whether you're the head of state of the French Republic, it doesn't matter who you are, but this 2 metre rule kind of is in force for now, and of course until the government lift it. But
as we saw, I mean, coronavirus doesn't discriminate, does it? Prince Charles has had it, the Prime Minister's had it, so it affects everybody, and therefore we've all got to take care.
There was some suggestion that our government might be reviewing the 2 metre distancing rules soon in any case, but I think that would probably make life a lot easier for a royal visit, of which there will be some, but still none from the Queen, obviously, because it's still in her mid-90s. It's still deemed, I think, too risky for her to leave Windsor Castle.
Yeah, and I think we've been warned that this is not a big fanfare return to life as normal. We're not going to have dozens of engagements.
Week, really, given where we were last week, we were talking about seeing the Queen for the first time. That was on Saturday, and in the space of sort of the following 6 days, we've had Charles and Camilla out twice, William out twice, and Kate out once.
Yeah, I think we will begin to see them out and about over the coming weeks, but I just don't think it will be back to the sort of normal level of working engagements that we've had, sort of 5, 6.
So, in your Robinson's royal forecast for next week is
nothing. That's partly because
this part of the show we should have scrapped a long time ago.
Yes, that's partly because anything we do know is being tightly embargoed because they're so conscious about crowds gathering, which royals attract crowds, and what we don't want
crowds
at the moment
are not socially distant. So we know something that's happening next week. So we've got at least one thing we can talk about on next week's podcast. Whether we're back in here, whether we're still at home, no idea. We can't make predictions in this world currently. But a busy week racing without the royals. Friends presidents, thanks to the NHS staff, garden centres, bakeries.
Actual royals in person. It's been lovely to be back.
Actual real life.
Yeah.
And if there's more to talk about on that front next week, we will. Thank you for continuing to watch. Thank you for continuing to subscribe. We appreciate your views and your support. Negative comments and positive comments are always welcome. Hashtag ITV News. No, what's our hashtag? Royal Rota ITV. There we are. Hashtag Royal Rota ITV. And we will see you next week. Bye-bye.